"We're selling the restaurant chain. You won't see a penny," my father declared, his voice carrying across the dining room like a death sentence. The crystal glasses on our Christmas table seemed to tremble from the force of his words. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching as my brothers Derek and Timothy burst into applause like trained seals. My name is Evelyn Grant, and I'm 45 years old. For the past 20 years, I've watched my family's restaurant empire grow from 3 locations to 37 establishments across Colorado and Wyoming. Tonight, in our family home in Denver, my father had just announced he was selling everything I'd helped build and ensuring I received nothing. "Finally," Derek said, raising his wine glass. "It's about time we got rid of this headache. Restaurant business is too volatile anyway." Timothy nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We can invest the money in something more stable. Real estate, maybe some tech stocks." I set down my fork and looked at my father, Harold Grant. At 72, he still commanded the room with his presence, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the expensive suit that our restaurants had bought him. His eyes held that familiar cold satisfaction I'd seen whenever he put me in my place. "Who's buying it?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Harold's face lit up with pride. "Phoenix Holdings. They're offering $25 million for the entire chain. Cash deal, closing next week." My brothers exchanged excited glances. Derek leaned forward, practically salivating. "That's over $8 million each for us, Dad. Not bad for Christmas." "Each?" I repeated, the word hanging in the air like smoke. "Of course each," Harold said dismissively. "Derek and Timothy are my business partners. You've never been more than an employee, Evelyn. A glorified manager who happened to share my last name." The familiar sting of his words washed over me, but this time something was different. This time, I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring both the vintage and the moment. "Do you know who owns Phoenix Holdings?" I asked, my voice carrying a note my family had never heard before. Harold waved his hand dismissively. "Some businesswoman, Patricia something. I'll meet her tomorrow at the closing. Why does it matter?" I grinned then, unable to help myself. "Maybe you'll be shocked when you find out." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My brothers stopped their celebration, sensing something had shifted. Harold's confident expression flickered, just for a moment, like a candle in the wind. Growing up in the Grant household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. Harold Grant had built his first restaurant, Grant's Steakhouse, when I was 5 years old. By the time I turned 18, he'd expanded to 5 locations, and the family business was thriving. But in Harold's world, women were meant to support, not lead. My brothers Derek and Timothy, 4 and 6 years older than me respectively, had been groomed from childhood to take over the business. They went to business school, learned about finance and operations, and were handed management positions straight out of college. Meanwhile, I was expected to help with bookkeeping and maybe manage a location or 2, nothing more. But I had other plans. While Derek partied his way through college and Timothy barely scraped by with passing grades, I threw myself into learning everything about the restaurant industry. I worked every position from hostess to line cook. I studied food costs, labor management, customer service, and marketing. I earned my degree in business administration while working full-time at our restaurants. When I turned 25, I approached Harold with detailed plans for expansion. I'd identified underserved markets, negotiated preliminary deals with suppliers, and even secured financing options. His response was swift and crushing. "Stick to what you know, sweetheart. Let the men handle the business decisions." So I did stick to what I knew. I learned more. For the next 20 years, I became indispensable to Grant's restaurant group while remaining invisible in the boardroom. I streamlined our supply chain, saving us millions. I developed staff training programs that reduced turnover by 60%. I created marketing campaigns that increased our revenue by 40% over 5 years. Derek and Timothy took credit for every innovation, every improvement, every success. Harold beamed with pride at his son's accomplishments, while I remained the efficient daughter who kept the books balanced and the operations running smoothly. But they never suspected what I was doing on my own time. 10 years ago, I started Phoenix Holdings with money I'd saved and investments I'd made. I bought struggling restaurants, turned them around using everything I'd learned from our family business, and sold them for profit. The company grew steadily, quietly, while I maintained my role as the overlooked daughter. Phoenix Holdings now owned 43 restaurants across 5 states, generating over $60 million in annual revenue. I employed over 2,000 people and had been featured in Restaurant Business magazine as Restaurateur of the Year under my business name, Patricia Phoenix, my middle name, and my mother's maiden name. Harold had no idea that the woman buying his precious empire was the daughter he'd dismissed for 25 years. Tomorrow's closing would be the sweetest revenge I could have imagined. The morning after Christmas, I woke up in my downtown Denver penthouse with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Today was the day Harold Grant would learn that his greatest mistake wasn't underestimating the restaurant business. It was underestimating his daughter. I dressed carefully for the closing, choosing a charcoal gray power suit and my favorite pearl necklace. In the mirror, I saw not the overlooked daughter from last night's dinner, but Patricia Phoenix, CEO of Phoenix Holdings. The transformation was subtle, but complete. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Can't wait to be done with this restaurant nightmare. Drinks tonight to celebrate?" I didn't respond. Let them celebrate while they could. At 9 a.m., I arrived at the law offices of Brixton & Associates downtown. The conference room was already set up with documents, and I could see Harold's attorney reviewing papers at the far end of the table. Harold himself hadn't arrived yet, no doubt savoring his final morning as a restaurant mogul. "Mr. Phoenix?" the lawyer asked, looking confused. "I thought we were meeting with Patricia Phoenix." "You are," I said simply, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Patricia is my middle name. I prefer Evelyn." Before he could respond, the conference room door opened and Harold walked in with Derek and Timothy flanking him like bodyguards. They were all smiles and expensive cologne, ready to collect their windfall. Harold stopped mid-stride when he saw me. "Evelyn, what are you doing here? The closing isn't for family members." I gestured to the nameplate in front of my seat. Patricia E. Phoenix, CEO, Phoenix Holdings. The silence that followed was deafening. Harold's face went through several shades of red before settling on a pale gray. Derek's mouth hung open like a caught fish, while Timothy just stared, as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. "This is some kind of joke," Harold said finally, his voice hoarse. "No joke, Father," I replied, pulling out my business cards and sliding them across the table. "Though I suppose there is some irony in the situation." Derek found his voice first. "You can't afford to buy us out. You're just a manager." I smiled at him, the same cold smile Harold had given me for years. "Actually, Derek, I can afford to buy you out twice over. Phoenix Holdings had gross revenues of $62 million last year. Your little restaurant chain, while charming, represents a relatively small acquisition for us." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should review the terms of the sale." Harold's hands were shaking as he reached for the documents. For the first time in my life, I watched my father, the man who'd built an empire through sheer determination, look truly defeated. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that even the air in the room felt different. "Shall we begin?" I asked, enjoying every second of their stunned silence. Harold's attorney cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. Mr. Grant, did you know the buyer was your daughter?" "She's not the buyer," Harold said through gritted teeth, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "This has to be some kind of setup. Evelyn works for me. She doesn't have this kind of money. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment I'd dreamed about for 20 years. Actually, Father, I haven't worked for you for quite some time. I've been working for myself. I pulled out my phone and showed them the Phoenix Holdings website. Their faces grew paler as they scrolled through the company profile, the restaurant locations, the financial reports that had been filed with the state. "This is impossible," Timothy whispered. How did you? "It's amazing what you can accomplish when no one's paying attention to you," I said. "For 10 years, I've been building Phoenix Holdings while you three took credit for innovations I developed for Grant's Restaurant Group. Every system improvement, every cost-saving measure, every successful marketing campaign, those were mine." Derek slammed his hand on the table. "You can't prove that." I smiled and pulled out a thick folder. "Actually, I can. These are copies of every email, every proposal, every suggestion I made that was later implemented under your names. I've been documenting everything since I turned 30. Harold's face was turning an alarming shade of purple. "You've been plotting against your own family for 15 years? "I've been preparing for the day you'd try to cut me out completely," I corrected, which coincidentally was yesterday. The lawyers were shuffling papers uncomfortably. Harold's attorney, a nervous man named Robert Walsh, kept glancing between the contracts and his client's increasingly agitated state. "Mr. Grant," Walsh said carefully, "the sale agreement is legally binding. Phoenix Holdings has already transferred the earnest money, and all conditions have been met." "We're not selling to her," Harold declared, standing up so abruptly his chair rolled backward. "I don't care about the contract. We'll find another buyer." I remained seated, perfectly calm. "Actually, Father, you don't have that luxury. The sale agreement includes a clause about backing out. If you breach the contract, you owe Phoenix Holdings $5 million in penalties, plus attorney fees, plus damages. Given that you've already spent money based on the expected sale, Derek's new Tesla, Timothy's down payment on that house in Aspen, you'd likely face bankruptcy." Derek's face went white. "How do you know about the Tesla?" "I know everything about your finances," I said simply, "including the fact that you've each borrowed against your expected inheritance. The money you're counting on from this sale is already spent." Timothy stood up shakily. "This is insane. You're our sister. Why would you do this to us?" For the first time, I felt a flicker of emotion break through my professional composure. "Because for 25 years you've treated me like I was worthless. Every idea I had was dismissed. Every contribution I made was ignored. Every achievement was credited to someone else. Did you think I would just accept that forever?" Harold sat back down heavily. "So what's your end game here, Evelyn? You want to destroy your own family?" "I want what I've always wanted," I said. "Recognition for what I've built. Respect for what I've accomplished, and compensation for 20 years of unpaid contributions to your success." I slid another document across the table. "These are my terms for the acquisition. The purchase price remains $25 million. However, I'm prepared to restructure how that money is distributed." Derek grabbed the paper. "What do you mean, restructure?" "Simple," I said. "You each receive $2 million. The remaining $19 million goes to the person who actually built the value in Grant's Restaurant Group. Me." The explosion that followed my announcement could probably be heard 3 floors down. Harold shot to his feet, his face now a dangerous shade of crimson, while Derek and Timothy began shouting simultaneously. "You conniving little—" Derek started. "This is theft," Timothy interrupted. "Gentlemen, please," Walsh said, but his voice was drowned out by Harold's roar. "Over my dead body!" Harold slammed both hands on the conference table. "I'll see you in court before I let you steal what I built." I waited for the storm to pass, then calmly opened another folder. "Father, I really wouldn't recommend litigation. It tends to be expensive, time-consuming, and in this case, quite embarrassing for you." "What are you talking about?" Harold demanded. "I'm talking about your little arrangement with the food suppliers, the kickbacks you've been receiving for the past 8 years, The tax evasion, the wage theft from hourly employees. I spread documents across the table like playing cards. Should I continue? The room fell dead silent. Walsh looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Derek and Timothy stared at their father with expressions I'd never seen before, fear mixed with dawning understanding. "You don't know what you're talking about," Harold said, but his voice had lost its authority. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied. "I've been the one managing the books, remember? I've seen every transaction, every suspicious payment, every creative accounting entry. I documented it all." I turned to Walsh. "I assume you weren't aware of your client's financial irregularities? Because if the IRS were to receive copies of these documents, there would likely be criminal charges, not just civil penalties." Walsh was frantically reviewing the papers I'd laid out. His face grew paler with each page. "Mr. Grant, I need to speak with you privately." "No," Harold said firmly. "Whatever she thinks she has, it's probably fabricated." I laughed, and even I was surprised by how cold it sounded. "Fabricated? Father, these are photocopies of documents with your signature, bank records with your authorization codes, email chains where you discuss the arrangements with suppliers. I even have recorded phone conversations." "Recorded conversations?" Timothy repeated weakly. "Colorado is a one-party consent state," I explained. "I've been legally recording business conversations for years. It's standard practice for executives to protect themselves. You should try it sometime." Derek slumped in his chair. "How long have you been planning this?" "Planning is such an ugly word," I said. "I prefer to think of it as being prepared for opportunities. And yesterday when Father announced he was cutting me out entirely, he created the perfect opportunity." Harold was staring at the document spread across the table. I could see the moment he realized the scope of what I had on him. His shoulders sagged. And for the first time in my life, he looked like an old man instead of an unstoppable force. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I already told you. $2 million each for Derek and Timothy. $19 million for me. And a public acknowledgement that I was the driving force behind Grant's restaurant group's success over the past 20 years. "Public acknowledgement?" Derek asked. "A press release," I said, "announcing the sale and crediting me with the innovations and improvements that made the company valuable enough for acquisition. Your choice is simple. Accept my terms, or face federal tax evasion charges and watch the company be sold in bankruptcy court for a fraction of its current value." The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Harold looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Respect, mixed with a grudging admiration. "You really are my daughter," he said. The acknowledgement hung in the air like a fragile truce. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Walsh was furiously scribbling notes, trying to calculate his client's options. Derek and Timothy sat in stunned silence, probably trying to figure out how $2 million each would cover their existing debts. Harold just stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "I need to understand something," Harold said slowly. "When did you stop being my daughter and become my enemy?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, 25 years of hurt and frustration rose in my throat. "I never stopped being your daughter. You stopped seeing me as one." "That's not." "When I was 8 years old," I continued, "I told you I wanted to run restaurants like you. Do you remember what you said?" Harold's face softened slightly. "No. You said little girls should dream about being princesses, not bosses. When I was 16 and wanted to work in the kitchen, you said it was too dangerous for a girl. When I graduated college with honors, you handed Derek a management position and gave me a job keeping books." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. "Every single time I proved myself, you found a reason why it didn't count. Every innovation I suggested, you gave to one of them to implement. I spent 20 years being invisible in my own family's business. But we always treated you well, Timothy protested. You had a good salary, health insurance, vacation time. I turned back to face them. I had a job, Timothy. Derek and Timothy had careers. There's a difference. Derek leaned forward. So this is what? Revenge? You're going to destroy us to make a point? I'm not destroying anything, I said, returning to my seat. I'm buying a business at fair market value and restructuring how the proceeds are distributed. The fact that this exposes decades of inequality isn't my fault. It's a consequence of your choices. Harold was quiet for a long time, studying the contracts and documents spread across the table. Finally, he looked up at his attorney. Robert, what are our legal options here? Walsh had been reviewing everything while we talked. Honestly, very few. The sale contract is ironclad, and if these financial irregularities are genuine, which they appear to be, fighting this could result in criminal charges. Your best option is to negotiate the terms Evelyn has proposed. And if we refuse? Derek asked. Then you'll likely face federal tax evasion charges, which carry both criminal penalties and massive financial judgments, Walsh said bluntly. The company would be tied up in litigation for years, during which time its value would plummet. You'd end up with nothing except legal bills and possibly prison time. The room fell silent again. I could practically hear the wheels turning in their heads as they calculated the mathematics of their situation. There's one more thing, I said quietly. If you accept my terms, I'm prepared to offer employment contracts to both Derek and Timothy. Management positions with Phoenix Holdings, reporting directly to me. They looked up in surprise. You'd hire us? Timothy asked. After everything? You're still my brothers, I said. And despite everything, you both have experience in restaurant management. Phoenix Holdings is expanding rapidly, and I need qualified people I can trust, provided you're willing to actually work for your positions instead of having them handed to you. Harold's eyes narrowed. And me? I met his gaze steadily. You get to retire with dignity instead of disgrace. $2 million and the knowledge that your daughter became everything you never believed she could be. The choice was theirs, but we all knew what they had to do. Harold stared at the contract for what felt like an eternity. The silence in the conference room was broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Denver traffic 12 floors below. Finally, he picked up the pen. I built this company with my bare hands, he said quietly, not looking at any of us. Started with one restaurant and a dream, 37 locations, over 800 employees, millions in revenue. He signed his name with sharp, decisive strokes. But I was wrong about one thing, he continued, setting down the pen and finally meeting my eyes. I thought I built it alone. Derek and Timothy signed without speaking, their faces pale but resigned. When the lawyers finished notarizing and filing the documents, Walsh shook my hand with what looked like genuine respect. Congratulations, Mr. Phoenix, he said. I've never seen a more thorough acquisition strategy. As the others packed up their papers, Harold remained seated. Evelyn, he said quietly, that job offer you mentioned for your brothers, is it real? Yes, I said. But they'll start at the bottom and work their way up based on performance, not family connections. No special treatment. Good, Harold said, surprising me. They need to learn what real work feels like. Derek looked up from his papers. Dad? I've been thinking about what Evelyn said, Harold continued, about us taking credit for her work. She's right. We did. He turned to me. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I was so focused on building something to pass down to my sons that I forgot I had a daughter who was already building something better. For the first time in 25 years, my father's apology sounded genuine. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the newest Phoenix Holdings location in Fort Collins, watching Derek train a group of new managers. He'd started as an assistant manager, working nights and weekends to prove himself. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like humility. Timothy had taken a position overseeing food safety compliance across all locations. It turned out he was actually quite good at details when his future depended on it. Both brothers were earning their salaries for the first time in their lives, and the change was remarkable. Harold had used his $2 million to buy a small bed and breakfast in Aspen, something he'd always talked about but never pursued. He called me weekly to discuss business strategies, asking for advice instead of dismissing my opinions. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real in a way it had never been before. The press release about the acquisition had indeed made headlines in the restaurant industry. Local restaurateur revealed as driving force behind Family Empire's success ran in Restaurant Business magazine, along with a detailed interview about my role in building Grant's Restaurant Group and my plans for Phoenix Holdings' expansion. The article had led to speaking engagements, consulting opportunities, and recognition I'd never dreamed of. More importantly, it had established the truth about who had really built the company's value. As I watched Derek patiently explain food cost calculations to his trainees, I realized that revenge had turned into something unexpected: reconciliation. Not the fairy tale kind where everyone lived happily ever after, but the real kind where people faced consequences, learned from mistakes, and chose to do better. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Proud of you, kiddo. Always have been, even when I was too stubborn to show it." For the first time in 25 years, I believed him. Harold, Derek, and Timothy faced the harsh reality that their years of taking credit for Evelyn's work had cost them $17 million and their positions of unearned authority. Harold's retirement was comfortable but modest compared to the empire he'd expected to leave his sons. Derek and Timothy, stripped of their automatic inheritances and management positions, had to learn actual work skills for the first time in their lives. They faced months of night shifts, weekend work, and performance reviews, experiencing the accountability they'd avoided for decades. The public revelation of Evelyn's true role in the company's success damaged their reputations in the restaurant industry, making it clear that their previous achievements had been built on their sister's uncredited labor. Most painfully, they had to watch Evelyn receive the recognition and respect that should have been hers all along, knowing they'd spent 25 years dismissing the very person who'd made their comfort possible. Looking toward the future, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond mere revenge. I'd not only reclaimed what was rightfully mine, but had forced my family to confront the truth about their treatment of me. The journey had taught me that sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying those who wronged you. It's building something so successful that they have no choice but to acknowledge what they tried to deny. My path forward was clear. Continue growing Phoenix Holdings while mentoring other women who'd been overlooked in family businesses. As I reflected on the months of planning that led to that Christmas dinner revelation, I realized that the sweetest revenge had been patience itself. Quietly building an empire while they dismissed me, then watching their faces when they discovered who held the power all along.